As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Biden is expected to ask for more Ukraine funds this week. So the White House is expected to formally ask Congress to authorize additional funding for the Ukraine war as soon as this week. And this is based on a report from Punchbowl News. They cited sources familiar with the matter. A lot of you probably haven't heard of Punchbowl News. They're a relatively new media outlet that started in 2021. But I know just other scoops I've seen them have turn out to be right. And so I figured this was worth highlighting here. So the funding would be in the form of an emergency supplemental bill that would also include money for domestic disaster relief and potentially military aid for Taiwan. One source said that the request is expected to be north of $10 billion, but the Biden administration is still working on setting up the final number. So far, Congress has authorized $113 billion to spend on the war in Ukraine. So Financial Times previously reported that President Biden wanted to include money for Taiwan in the next Ukraine spending bill, and that Financial Times report said that the request is expected to be made in August, so that kind of lines up with this Punchbowl report. So the Punchbowl report said that Taiwan aid could be included as a sweetener for Republicans who might otherwise oppose more spending on the Ukraine war. And I think that's a lot of what this is about, is trying to, because there are unfortunately, a lot of Republicans that oppose more aid for Ukraine do so because they think the U.S. should be more focused on China and Taiwan, which is kind of depressing when you think about it. A Ukrainian official told Politico on Tuesday that all Russian ports and ships, including commercial vessels, are considered legitimate military targets as the war in Ukraine is escalating in the Black Sea. So this is Oleg Ustenko. He's an economic advisor to Zelensky, which is kind of interesting that he would say something like this. But he said, quote, "Everything the Russians are moving back and forth on the Black Sea are our valid military targets," end quote. So the comments came after Ukraine attacked a Russian commercial port and a Russian tanker. According to Ukrainian security service sources speaking to the media, the tanker that was targeted, the SIG, was hit by a sea drone packed with 992 pounds of TNT, and the attack blasted a hole in the vessel's engine room. So attacks on commercial ships, it seems like they're going to escalate. And again, this is a very dangerous, slippery slope because there's so many, U.S. and NATO ships and planes and trucks carrying all sorts of equipment. They're saying that oil that the Russian military uses is a legitimate military target. Well, apply that to all the stuff Ukraine is getting from the West. This is seriously could give Russia another pretext for strikes on NATO. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned the Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah on Tuesday, threatening to send Lebanon back to the Stone Age in the event of an escalation or conflict. So he also warned Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah not to make a mistake. He said, quote, "Don't mistake us. We don't want war, but we are ready to protect our citizens, our soldiers, and our sovereignty," end quote. The Israeli defense minister made his remarks in a video while visiting the Israel-Lebanon border. So tensions between Israel and Hezbollah have risen in recent months, with Hezbollah having erected 2 tents in the Sheba Farms area in response to Israel's construction of a fence around the nearby town of Gajar. So Sheba Farms, how I understand it, Israel annexed it when they annexed the Golan Heights in 1981 after they withdrew. And Sheba Farms was kind of disputed between Lebanon and Syria, but Lebanon claims it, and Hezbollah, they say it's occupied by Israel. So there's always tensions there, and they seem to be rising. So things could always, kind of break out there. So the U.S. deployed 4 Navy destroyers in response to Russian and Chinese vessels operating near Alaska's Aleutian Islands, which stretch far into the northern Pacific Ocean. The incident occurred last week when 11 Chinese and Russian warships were conducting joint patrols near the Aleutians. It's not clear how close they got to the islands or to Alaska's territory. And if you're watching here, you can see the map of Alaska, and the Aleutians stretch very far out. And then there's some Russian-controlled islands not too far away, islands that are Russian territory. So, this is a pretty big stretch of area where these vessels could have operated, whether in the Bering Sea, which is north of the Aleutians, or down in the Pacific Ocean. So Northern Command, which is the U.S. command that is responsible for this area, said, quote, "Air and maritime assets under our commands conducted operations to assure the defense of the United States and Canada. The patrol remained in international waters and was not considered a threat," end quote. So that's what the U.S. military is saying. Of course, you're going to get bluster from other U.S. officials. So it's interesting because the U.S. insists that it has the right to patrol sensitive waters near China and Russia, such as the Taiwan Strait and the Black Sea. But Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan, who's a Republican, he blasted the patrol as, quote, another reminder that we have entered a new era of authoritarian aggression led by the dictators in Beijing and Moscow, end quote. So some pretty serious rhetoric there. Sullivan said that he was happy that the U.S. Navy deployed destroyers to monitor the Chinese and Russian vessels, and said that their response to a similar patrol that took place last year was not adequate. So for their part, China said that the patrol was not directed at the U.S. China's spokesman for the Chinese embassy in the U.S. said, quote, according to the annual cooperation plan between the Chinese and Russian militaries, naval vessels of the two countries have recently conducted joint maritime patrols in relevant waters in the western and northern Pacific Oceans. This action is not targeted at any third party and has nothing to do with the current international and regional situation, end quote. The Russian and Chinese militaries have been increasing cooperation in recent years as both nations have faced similar pressure from the U.S. and its allies. So there has been kind of an uptick in Chinese and Russian activity in this area. But, you know, I saw this, I didn't really plan on covering this, but I just saw this got a lot of attention, so many people making a big deal about it. So I figured it was worth, covering and kind of putting in, proper context.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
They go on to say the banking industry got another reminder. Who the fuck you talking to? That the problems that roiled the financial world in the spring are not yet past. Regional bank stocks fell Tuesday after Moody's Investors Service downgraded 10 mid-sized institutions by a single notch. Moody's also warned about a review of 6 other banks or possible downgrades, including U.S. Bancorp, State Street, Bank of New York Mellon, Citizens Financial, on and on. M&T got downgraded too. National Bancorp. All right? We warned you that this is going to happen. For how long? It's not only the office building bust. It's the multi-apartment complex bust. It's the commercial real estate bust in the retail sector, particularly in malls. This thing is going to go down. Oh yeah, the plantation workers of America were over $1 trillion in credit card debt. When I was a kid, I used to use the mafia. Hey, the mafia and the Jewish gangsters. They're charging 10% interest rates when you borrow money from them. Oh, yeah? What are the banks charging now? Up to 22%? What do they normally charge? About 17, 18%? Hey, they're the banksters. You guys, you wops, you mafia, just a bunch of guineas. We could fuck the people any way we want. We're too big to fail. You're just a piece of shit. This fat pig, this arrogant piece of scum shit, a fucking loser with a bad attitude, Chris Christie, running for president of the United States. That's the cat. Blimpitis, man. This is the story from the Toilet Paper Record on August 5th. Christie meets with Zelensky in Kyiv, signaling his support ahead for 2024. Mr. Christie, in his second 2024 geopolitical visit to Zelensky, said that he praised Zelensky for demonstrating, quote, the resolve it takes to survive a war and ultimately win it. Ultimately win it? It's fucking losing. And could you go resolve a war like that? Anybody that supports the war in Ukraine, go over there and fight, fat boy. And McConnell and Pelosi and Feinstein and all you scumbag so-called progressive liberal Democrats who voted to send more weapons of death. Go over there and fight. Send your kids, send your partners, send your transgenders, send your money, or go over there or shut your fucking mouth. In particular, his delays in supplying F-16s. Quote, I would have been sending them months ago, Mr. Christie said. I would have been sending them. Could you imagine a stupid fucking piece of shit like him telling you what to do? And it's across the spectrum. Fucking little Chucky Schumer. Bullshit Bernie Sanders. This little fucking slob prick who couldn't fight shit, Lindsey Graham. So all the bullshit coming from the media was that they counteroffensive. So look at your counteroffensive cover, few weeks ago, and we made it clear that it was not going to happen. The counteroffensive, don't count on it. So now this is in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. Ukraine's bid to retake Bakhmut falters. Frontline soldiers describe a stalling counteroffensive against Russian forces. Let's go back to the facts. The fact is that the Wall Street Journal, one after another, kept quoting Zelensky and everybody that they wanted, that the counteroffensive was going to drive the Russians out. One after another kept promoting it. And they were wrong. Today, in the Cartoon News Network front page, Western allies receive increasingly sobering updates on Ukraine's counteroffensive. Quote, this is the most difficult time of the war. Weeks into Ukraine's highly anticipated counteroffensive. Highly anticipated. Highly promoted by you little bastards with no fucking balls. You little fucking warmongering whores. Yeah, you're the ones. All bullshit. All bullshit. And then you write this crap. Western officials describe Western officials, official pieces of shit. Official pieces of shit that the masses believe, whether it's about getting the jab, fighting the COVID war, you believe the crap spewing out of the mouths of morons. All of you people, we're not talking to you because you hate me. You know why? Because you're a coward and you won't fight for freedom. And you're too fucking stupid and ballless to think for yourself. And you hate the truth and trends. So therefore, you hate the Trends Journal because we give you history before it happens. And again, watch out what's going on in this banking sector. We got it in detail in your Trends Journal.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Exactly know how it works. Is the sheriff in charge of the police force? Like, do you actually hire and fire people?
The sheriff is what's called in Arizona the chief law enforcement officer of the county. So that means supposedly over city police and over federal agents. Like the federal agents, if they do a search warrant in my county, they're supposed to advise me. A couple of times they failed to do so, and I reprimanded them for that. But they are supposed to advise me if they're going to do, like, say, a federal search warrant in the county. And the city police is supposed to advise the sheriff on any law enforcement activities they're taking in the county. But the reality of my life is, since I'm on the border here and we have the largest border patrol office in the whole U.S. is in my county, and the third largest is also in my county, and we have the largest ports of entry of any county in Arizona. So there's another 1,000 officers that work there. There's a large DEA office, large FBI presence. So for practical purposes, federal officers outnumber local officers 30-1. There's 30 federal officers for every local officer. So it's kind of hard for me to require them in any meaningful way to seek my concurrence before they do anything. But, you know, these three-letter federal agencies are all Johnny-come-lately. They all came around in the 1900s, you know, like the FBI and the DEA and the ATF. Like the DEA was a creation of Nixon in 1973. You know, it's like very recent. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was supposed to be just an unarmed intelligence gathering service, and that morphed into a law enforcement agency that carries guns and does SWAT raids. But all what you would call law enforcement at the civil and criminal level was all handled by the sheriff's office in the beginning of this country, you know, 1700s and 1800s. There was no such thing as even police departments until the 1800s when Robert Peel created the London Police Department, and then that was replicated in the U.S., New York Police Department, Chicago Police Department, Los Angeles Police Department. But before that, it was just the sheriff who was kind of the arm of the court for all civil and criminal functions. And it wasn't a patrol function either. It was like people would make a complaint, civil complaint or criminal complaint. The judge would make a ruling. He would issue a writ of execution, and then the sheriff goes and seizes the mule that was taken improperly from Farmer Brown and give it back to Farmer Smith. You know, it was basically the arm of the court or the judge. It's his arms and legs out in the community, like go seize that person, go seize that thing and return it to the rightful owner. But that's what it was. The sheriff did all the law enforcement functions in the U.S. at the inception of this country.
We hear over and over again, those of us who live nowhere near the border. You know, I've lived in Florida, I've lived in the Northeast for quite some time, lived in the Midwest, never lived close to the border. And we hear all these stories about what's going on there and what should be done. Well, what is your perspective?
Yeah, it's a very safe region, but that sells newspapers at the national level to talk about a border crisis and a war zone. My wife and I live on the ranch right next to the border. We look right into the hills in Mexico, and we take walks every night parallel to the border, and it's safe and everything. There's a lot of attempts to conflate migration with drug trafficking. The migrants that are coming over to work are all bringing fentanyl, and it's very promotes this kind of crisis mentality, and some people use that to scare people, to scare the voters. Arizona has a large retired population, so it's kind of easy to scare those people that come in from another state, Michigan, Minnesota. They move down here to Sun City or Green Valley or Chandler or, Yuma because of the weather, and then they're told you have to be scared of your own shadow down here. But, I go to Mexico all the time, and I went to the public schools here, as my wife did here, and it's a very safe environment. And of course, as a libertarian, my thoughts on kind of immigration and border issues all go back to property rights. What little is left of the U.S. automotive industry wouldn't exist without these sub-assembly plants in Mexico right across the border. So it's a very hustling, bustling, busy area, a lot of buying and selling both ways, tourism going both ways, a lot of medical tourism for cheaper medical procedures and dental procedures in Mexico. But it does bother me when people try to make hay out of this idea that it's a war zone and everybody's getting inundated and killed with migrants that come and rape and plunder and pillage and loot and all this kind of stuff. And it's just not true. Like, my family has had ranch property along the border my whole life, my dad's life, my grandfather's life, my great-grandfather's life, and it's just been a peaceful relationship.
You've got 100 sheriffs who are, let's say, broadly sympathetic with your worldview. How would you advise them in their capacity as sheriff?
It's a difficult question because the sheriff's office is not a market creation. The Board of Supervisors picks a number out of thin air and says, you need to have X number of officers. And who knows, people may want more than that or less than that, or they may want to do their own security. There's no price signal to indicate whether people even want something like a sheriff's office to exist. So philosophically, for me, that's a conundrum, that this is a theft-funded organization, coercively funded, but they do some things that people would think are of value, like maybe upholding property titles and deeds and things like that. But, what I would say is just keep it simple. If I was speaking to a group of sheriffs, which I have done, just say look, I have no desire to run people's lives. You should have no desire to run people's lives. Let the market figure things out. Let people get rewarded in the market. They get more of good things. They vote with their dollars. They get more of good things and they get less of bad things. Let's not go out there and pitch a crisis. Unfortunately, that's kind of one of the main strategies of running for a position like sheriff is you need me to go out there and take care of all the problems in the world, all the scumbags and all the people that are going to break into your house and rip you off and run you off the road because they're a bunch of drunk drivers. So unfortunately, that's one of the main ways to campaign. I didn't campaign that way and it worked for me, but a lot of people are pushing for government to expand. I need more officers. We need more overtime. We need newer vehicles. We need better pensions. We need more pay. So I think I would just keep it simple, something along those lines, Tom, and just say we should strive to let people live their lives. That the foundation of this country, free markets, capitalism, let people run their own lives and make their own decisions. Let's get involved as little as possible and just let people make their own decisions.
And it also seems to be verging on criminalizing speech. Essentially, what they're saying is that because they're saying that he lied, they're saying that he knew it was a lie. And so by pushing this lie, he committed fraud against the American people. Which is a very, but number one, in order to actually prove this, you would have to demonstrate that that he knew it was a lie. And the evidence that they seem to have for that is that a bunch of people around him told him that it wasn't true. But that's such a ridiculous leap from that to get to he believed them. Because he also had lots of people around him, again, however you feel about them, Giuliani and what was the other, the lady, Powell, Sidney Powell. He had these people around him. His legal team was telling him that you absolutely won this and we can win in court.
I don't even know the particulars, but the fact that they had to change the law at least means that they realized that the old law was open to interpretation. Yeah,
their argument is that it was illegal, but also we had to write a law to make it illegal.
And to make it clear that it was illegal, which means that at a minimum, that sounds to me like an admission that like what he did might have been some Wile E. Coyote bad tricks, but it sounds like it was at least reasonable for a lawyer, probably Eastman, to sit down and go, hey, I think you have a room to do this. Now, should no one have done it? Probably. But it sounds like there was at least open for interpretation, which sounds like it would be hard to prove that what he was doing was like fraudulent or against the law because you had to change the law because apparently it was open for that interpretation as one.
And this is what I was arguing with people on Twitter for, where they're like, oh, but what's the specific crime that this guy violated or what's that? And you're like, dude, if you can look at the Bush administration and the Obama administration and the Trump administration and not see the obvious crimes that were committed. I mean, look, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It claims it's the supreme law of the land, and everybody in government claims to agree with that. They all put their hand on the Constitution and take an oath to defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic. Every single politician has done this, okay? And the Constitution very clearly says that only Congress can declare a war. That the last war that was declared in the United States of America was World War II. The legal justification for every single war since World War II, every single one of them, Vietnam, Korea, Serbia, Iraq again, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan, everyone, and I've missed quite a few, the Baltics, every war, the justification for every single one of them, the legal justification, is that wasn't a war. And this is the truth. They justify it by saying that wasn't a war. It was a military action. Could you think of a flimsier excuse than that? That the war in Iraq, which we all call the war in Iraq, because it's clearly a war, wasn't a war at all. Could you think of a more 1984 spin than that? Oh, that wasn't a war. That was just 20 years of military actions, just a whole lot of them. Now, of course, when we get hit on Pearl Harbor, when we get hit on 9/11, what do we say? That was an act of war. Because obviously it is. I mean, like, how could you call it anything else? On 9/11, that day, by that afternoon, it was all, we're at war. We've been attacked. We are at war. This was an act of war. Because of course it is. If anyone bombs us, that's an act of war. But yet we can have sustained bombing campaigns for decades and say that's not a war. No, legally speaking, it's not a war. Now, either it is a war and it's an illegal war because it was not declared by the Congress, or your argument is that it's not a war, which is the flimsiest of legal defenses imaginable. It's a clear violation of Article 1, Section 8 presidential authorities. World Jews want to retire.
This is the way this incident should be handled. Like if we actually lived in just a normal, sane planet, it would be the lady going, hey, I'm trying to chop the dick off my 3-year-old, and you've made it harder for me to do so. And Ron DeSantis would go, well, I believe that is child abuse. And yes, I've made it illegal for doctors to mutilate children within Florida. I think you need help. You should get your child help. And if you feel otherwise, you can bring them to one of the other states that have delusional mental illness and are willing to remove your child's penis for you. We will not have that in Florida. That's the way that should be handled. And so in this instance, when a lady lies about the victimhood of the Jews, a guy should be able to go, listen, I know the game that you're playing. You're an evil person for trying to affiliate me with this nonsense. Yeah. Sit down. That's the way that should be handled.
But instead, yes. Here's what actually happens is that, and this is what's so crazy about the whole thing, is that DeSantis is up there like, I'm Mr. Woke governor. And then she's like, well, how about being woke on the Jews? And he's like, I'm the wokest. I'm the wokest on the Jews. I'm just not woke on transgender, but I'm so woke on the Jews. You have no idea. I am so into identity politics when it comes to Jewish people. I'll throw money at it. I'll ban it. I'll ban it in universities. He actually says, we're going to treat it just like racism in universities. Literally out of his mind, out of his mouth. We're going to treat it just like racism in universities. How about don't treat anything the way you treat racism in universities? I thought that was the whole fucking problem, was that you guys are insane about it. What does it turn into? Well, you know what? We must always support the nation of Israel. And the problem is that there's people on college campuses who are criticizing them. And there's a movement, pushing to boycott them. Because I won't stand for that. There's this government. And you know what we have to do? We have to go after these third world countries that are hotbeds of anti-Semitism. Whoa. What exactly? If that's not the most neocon speak I've ever heard in my life. Oh, we've been spending the last 20 years going after a lot of third world countries. And you're saying now the reason is because they don't like Jews. Huh. Okay, so is that really what it's all about? Man, just all. Yeah, this really, DeSantis to me is just done. Like he's just a factor or entity in this race. I just have zero interest in hearing another thing from him. Just go back to Florida, and if there's ever a fucking pandemic again, try to be good on that. And yeah, don't let them chop kids' dicks off.
But essentially, as credentialed or whatever, the same sort of social status as the CFR or some of the bigger think tanks, right? And they have this thing is called the First Battle of the Next War, Wargaming a Chinese Invasion of Taiwan. And you've said that of all the different war games and scenarios and simulations that have been held, you thought this was the most serious and I guess the most well done, and yet still revealed glaring flaws in the game itself, but also predicted the almost worst case outcome for everyone involved, huh?
That's right, Scott. I mean, I think we should all of us who care about U.S.-China relations and who want to prevent, a repeat or even something much, much worse even than Ukraine in the Taiwan context need to, I think, take a very close look at this game. Yeah, in terms of the fidelity, the effort, the methodologies employed, this is I call it the most serious look at what a Taiwan scenario, how it could unfold. And, I should say at the outset, I do give the authors of this effort and CSIS quite a bit of credit here for really pushing the boundaries and taking our understanding a lot further. But like I said, I'm quite critical because although they have exposed some critical realities, such as, let me underline this 2 or 3 times, that they show that if this war is fought, that the costs to the United States are likely enormous. Hundreds of aircraft, dozens of ships, tens of thousands of servicemen killed potentially. So, they have revealed, I think, what Americans have not wanted to think about, which is that this could be, look a lot more like World War II. World War I, in the scale of destruction. So, but I hope we can get more into the details here because actually, that's what they evaluate as sort of likely. But when you look at the fine print, you see that actually even their estimates of what could happen, that is the worst case. And after all, we should keep the worst case in mind when we take these kind of risks. Now that is really breathtaking and horrifying, honestly. Chinese officers are inculcated with the sense that unification between Taiwan and mainland is really the main focus, the main purpose of the PLA is to achieve unification from day one of the time they joined the PLA. So there's a very fundamental difference. And I think that, unfortunately, that's why this is fraught with risks, primarily for Taiwan, but also very much for the United States. For China as well. I'm not sugarcoating this from the Chinese point of view. Their losses would probably also be huge, and the risks are very severe for China. But what I want to underline here is that this report, as helpful as it is, and again, I really strongly urge people to take a quick look at it, its conclusions. But what I fear is that we haven't really understood the full implications of this report. Let me just give you one example here. Like I said, in the best case, this report finds that the U.S. in this war loses about 200 aircraft. This is best case, 200 aircraft and about a dozen warships. However, there is a worst case here. And in the worst case, the numbers are something like, at one point they say the U.S. might, we might lose, let's see, I think 4 aircraft carriers, 29 destroyers and cruisers, and 15 nuclear submarines. As somebody who worked for the Navy for 20 years, I can say, that would be nearly half of our Navy. And I can't imagine, the loss of life would be, well over 100,000. That is just appalling. And I have to say, I don't think that is the worst case, actually. I think it could be significantly worse even than that. So I think they underestimate in some ways the possible losses to U.S. forces. I can go through the details there, but it's a situation where we could lose, a third to a half of our Air Force and Navy. I think we had better think twice, 3 times, 4 times, and hopefully, in my view, effectively close the door on this. Fighting over Taiwan is, really a bridge too far. I would hope we have learned lessons from Ukraine. That is, you don't want to stir up this hornet's nest in the backyard of an angry great power. And again, Russia may be a great power. China is a bona fide superpower, and there's a difference.
Well, listen, here's an option. We could negotiate and help peacefully reunify China and Taiwan, like in the deal. And then nobody has to fight at all.
Well, okay, Scott, I think you seem to know a lot about Taiwan situation because, right, if you study the history, you know that there are political diplomatic solutions to this effort. But one absolutely critical takeaway, and here I agree with the writers of the report, they said this is not Ukraine. This is not a situation where, you can continue, you can basically take a hands off and continue to send supplies. That's, seems absolutely not the case. They say, more or less no aircraft or U.S. aircraft or ships are going to reach this island in the case of a Taiwan scenario. It will be totally, subsumed under China's sort of, missile, if you will, umbrella, to the point that, they described, for example, just again, one scenario that they look into, they said that in a couple of iterations, U.S. players in the game tried to send in a few battalions of U.S. troops, Marines and soldiers. And they said these troops are destroyed in the air. They don't even get to they don't even land on Taiwan. They said a couple of thousand U.S. troops killed when their transport aircraft are shot down. And that's the situation. So what the gamers say here is like, look, this is fundamentally different than Ukraine. Everything Taiwan needs in that first month or first few months has to be on the island already. And that, may imply to you some kind of level of unreality.
It was a 19-page memo outlining all of the details of the records that were being sent. As you can see now, it was released just this morning. Third bank records memorandum from Oversight Committee investigation into the Biden family influence peddling and business schemes. Now here is if you go to the next one, here is a Fox News write-up of it. And we're not going to go into the weeds here too much, Dr. Paul. That's not really what we do on the program, but here's a couple of things. This is from the Fox write-up. 19-page memo provides screenshots of redacted bank records. It says millions in payments came from Ukrainian energy company Burisma Holdings, we know that, as well as Russian oligarch Yelena Baturina and Kazakhstani oligarch Kenesh Rakishev, and that then Vice President Biden attended dinners with Baturina, Rakishev, and 8th representative from Burisma. And it says, the memo states the Vice President met in person for significant periods of time with those individuals or the representatives. The VP Biden joined approximately 20 phone calls on speakerphone with Hunter Biden's foreign business associates and attended dinners with foreign oligarchs who paid huge sums of money to Hunter Biden. This is from the memo. Joe Biden, quote, the brand was the only product the Bidens sold. $20 million.
Easy money.
Yeah.
So easy money. Hopefully, it'll lead to hard times.
Yeah.
But that's not likely to happen. But they've been able to get away with it. That's why the ideas and the control of the media are so important. That is also the reason why we've emphasized this thing. When governments and big business get together, they can control, the freedom of speech of individuals, and that's still a mess. But I think that we've made some progress there, where people are starting to wake up and not trust social media and a few others. But that is a big problem. It's a sad story, and you talk about the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
There is none, and I think there's been a significant change systematically over 100 years of shifting from a republic to this authoritarian system that we have. And if you don't have a justice system, there is no republic. You can't have it because they control things. And of course, my decade of becoming more alert to what was going on was in the 60s. But that was when the deep state really showed their muscle, and now that has progressed, and bits and pieces of people starting to resist, but it has to be, competing with them with, if they're telling a lie, you have to refute them, and you have to stick to your guns, you have to tell the truth, and you have to have principles behind it, and you can't use force. What they do, force and intimidations, and the authoritarian approach, like the freedom of speech, what do? If you don't do what we tell you, you've lost your job.
Yeah.
It'll ruin your life, and they were capable of doing that.
Does Ukraine have compromat on Joe Biden is the question that Professor Abrams asks. Now, he goes through the beginning of the article talking about how many years they talked about how the Russians have compromat on Trump. There was that tape that supposedly that he was involved in, and he was on record with prostitutes and what have you. All of it lies made up by Hillary Clinton's feverish mind. None of it was true. But Professor Abrams is saying, well, in light of all that being absolutely fake, why don't we look at that same idea with the Bidens and with Ukraine? Do they have something on Biden? And I think the question, can be answered in the affirmative. At least it appears that way. Let's look at this next clip. This is from Abrams' piece. He's talking about the testimony of Devin Archer, and he's talking about Shokin. Now, Shokin, we were just talking about him. He was the prosecutor who was fired when Joe told Ukraine to fire him. So here's what Abrams writes. Archer also testified that Shokin was fired by Joe for not for being a corrupt prosecutor, but for investigating the millions of dollars Burisma was paying Hunter, whom the company owner Mykola Zhukleski said was, quote, stupider than my dog. In subsequent interviews, Archer has even more clearly confirmed that Shokin was fired for pursuing Burisma's enormous payoffs to the Biden family. And he said all of this is well known to Ukrainian officials. Shokin himself released a video, and I watched part of that video, Dr. Paul, directly rebutting Biden loyalists in the American media, in which he explains in detail why Vice President Biden threatened Ukraine's president with holding back critical American aid if Shokin was not immediately fired. if we put the next one on, sorry to belabor this, Dr. Paul, but I think it's a good question. And here's what Shokin said in a video he made just recently. He said, the depiction of these investigations as dormant has nothing to do with reality of the facts. Mr. Biden was told we were going to start questioning his son and others, Archer and others, all involved in the Burisma case. And everyone understood very well that this fight was going to end badly for them. Biden had understood what was looming. We were about to reach the outcome of the case. Having understood all this, Biden used all the unofficial means at his disposal. Biden was acting on behalf of his own interests for his family. Joe Biden had reason to fear all of this would eventually fall on his son. And for that, he was fired at the demand of Biden.
One of the things that bothers me the most is the advertisements, to help the people who have been injured in the wars that we precipitated. It just tears me up because they really are victimized. But we should be doing a lot more to not only being compassionate about helping people like that, I believe in that, but I also believe in the compassion that pressures us to say, well, why don't we look at the cause and why don't we work to prevent it and steer from this? Because right now we're talking about a symptom of a corrupt system and a corrupt justice system, a corrupt monetary system, a corrupt military and military-industrial complex. It's all that. But if we don't go back that one step and look at what is the precipitating cause, and it is dishonesty and not having a belief in what a higher law is all about, and even if it exists.
Yeah, absolutely.